The repercussions of global economy in case US defaults on debt. US is close to breaching its 31.4 trillion debt ceiling. The government imposed limit on the total funds it can borrow to pay for existing legal obligations, including interest on national debt, military salaries, tax refunds, and mediocre and social Medicare and Social Security. A breach, should it happen by June 1 deadline, risks an economic debacle that could lead to a credit rating downgrade with the knock-on effect of soaring interest rates and tanking stock markets. This in turn would have a deleterious impact on the retirement and saving accounts, the pace of business activity, and therefore on employment. With the global economy limping out of the COVID 19 recession scenario, a US federal government debt default would represent a shock to the financial system, and a still fragile recovery across many economies may be compromised. Matters could worsen if the US federal government goes into its 22nd shutdown and government employees are furloughed. In an attempt to coax lawmakers into cooperation and hammer out an agreement to raise or suspend the debt ceiling, the White House put out its calculations of the debt damage that would result in the following expected stats: 8.3 million jobs lost, 6.1% drop in annualized growth of real GDP, and unemployment at 5%. A default would destabilize the global financial system, which depends on the stability of the dollar as the world's safe asset and primary reserve currency. John Ross from the Nonpartisan Center for American Progress wrote in a recent article: a loss of confidence in the dollar could have far reaching economic and foreign policy ramifications, as other countries, particularly China, would use default to push for their currency to serve as the foundation of global trade, she said. At the heart of this fiscal quagmire is a lack of bipartisan consensus on how to avoid repeating cycles of national economic stress stemming from the debt ceiling itself. Some analysts observe that the ceiling is a useful device for the US government to its own hands and submit to a credible commitment to limit public spending, especially as it requires legislative consent and with it some congressional oversight authority. Others argue that the ceiling is an antiquated mechanism that places unwarranted restrictions on robust fiscal policy, including on the need to meet previously legislated fiscal obligations either way. The deeper reason to worry about the debt ceiling bringing the economy to the precipice of default every few years is that the ceiling readily serves as a political tool for the party not in control of the White House to gain leverage over the fiscal priorities of the administration and hobble its plan to deliver on campaign promises. A major debt payment is due on June 15th. The government could make do with the ever shrinking fiscal wiggle room until then. However, House of Representatives Speaker Kevin McCarthy said a Republican would be wise to realize that putting partisan goals and personal popularity ahead of the greater good will not be something that the American middle class will forgive easily in the 2024 presidential elections, especially if this brinkmanship ends up causing a painfully interactable economic crisis. In the unlikely event of a default, the consequences would be substantial, according to Eric Doe, Director of Economic Studies at IESEG Business School in France. The interest rates charged by investors on bonds issued by United States would rise sharply, as would private debt, which US US government uses US government debt as a benchmark, he said. This increase in the cost of credit would cause a drop in business and household investment, as well as in consumption. And there's a sharp recession in the United States. Dore continued, adding it could also cause a recession in Europe and elsewhere. In the unlikely event of a default, the consequences would be substantial.